Thank you for coming, everybody, and welcome to Caroline. She's going to introduce herself. Haven't seen her for years, so it's good to see you again.
Thanks.
Over to you.
Okay, yeah. So my name's Caroline. I work at Litchard Mission Church. I'm the youth and families worker, which is like in the world of children's work. If you just do a name generator thing, spin the wheel, that's what they came up with, youth and families worker. I cover babies through to 18-year-olds and their families. So it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of different things. And most of the kids that I see throughout the week come from unchurched families. Most of them don't come into church unless it's for the youth club. Lots of them didn't know that we thought Jesus was real up until a few months ago. So make of that what you will. And this isn't my first time in this church. Isn't my first time in this room. I used to come here for Cambrats rehearsals when I was little, and we used to have snacks and squash in this room, I think. So I used to run around here like a mad person, really. So today we're going to be looking at Gen Z and Gen Alpha and how we can walk alongside them. It's going to be looking mainly at what their worldview is and what kind of things have influenced their worldview, which should help us to think more about how we can engage with them and come alongside them as we try to introduce them to Jesus as their saviour. So first up is to clarify who are Gen Z and Gen A. So Gen Z are those, people vary, but like 1996-ish, 1997-ish to 2010. So I'm 1997, so I'm like the eldest Gen Z that you can meet, and I'm almost 28. And then Generation Alpha, 2010 to 2025. And Generation Beta, they're the ones that have just started being born, so that's fun. So that's who we're talking about. And when we look at these two generations, Gen Z and Gen Alpha, they're normally characterized as the two generations that have grown up with technology at their fingertips from a very young age, to the extent where most of their day-to-day life is run by technology or involves some form of technology. So before we go any further, this is something you kind of hear fairly often when talking to people, is that they'll go, well, let's do this was what I would have liked when I was a teenager, or this is what my kids would have liked when they were a teenager. So in like groups of 2, 3, 4, however many you want, on your own, think in your own mind, is a teenager just a teenager? What are the differences, what are the similarities between teenagers today and teenagers in generations gone by? And then we'll come to... I did this talk on Saturday, and the first answer we got was that teenagers today and teenagers in days gone by are all humans. So if we can like try and think slightly better than that we know they're all humans. So like maybe some more like other similarities and differences between teenagers today and teenagers gone by. I'll give you like 2 minutes. I've got a glass of water. Yeah, I don't really want coffee now, as I'll get really, really shaky. Okay. Shoo, let's see what we have. Okay, can we come together? And we're going to think, because I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the differences or why I think there are differences. So if you guys can give me some similarities between teenagers today and teenagers in the past, beyond the fact they're just human.
Having to deal with the fact that their bodies are changing.
Having to deal with the fact their bodies are changing. Yes, every summer I'm on a 16 to 18-year-old camp, and I've been there for 3-4 years, and we have lots of trouble getting, especially the boys, out of bed. Like getting them into bed and getting them out of bed in the morning is extremely difficult. And I imagine that is something that all camps of that age have had to deal with, because their hormones are there and their bodies are changing and they've got all that drama going on in their lives. Yeah. Any other similarities in teenagers?
It's like when you start to build your own identity and figure out where you are in the world and who you are, and have all these questions about yourself and life. But then the world around you is so different these days from when I was a teenager.
Yeah, identity and working out who they are, kind of going through fads and fashions and everything like that, and then introducing themselves to politics and all those kind of things. Yeah, they're working out who they are, but they also have loads of voices screaming at them who they should be at the same time. Yeah, anything else?
Dodgy fashion sense.
Dodgy fashion sense. I've got on here like clothing, the clothing and the slang. I had to give a report of like what one of the girls at our youth group looked like, and I was like, well, she was either in joggers or she was in like leggings. I was like, that's the only two things the girls that I work with wear. I have no idea which of these two uniforms she was wearing, but it was one of those two uniforms. But yeah, the teenager is a teenager approach is really easy for us to do because it's something we can relate to. It also means we don't necessarily have to talk to teenagers themselves, because we remember what we were like as teenagers and what our kids were like as teenagers. But I think it is important to have a little bit of a magnifying glass approach to are there differences, are there similarities, so that we can treat each generation as they are, rather than as maybe a stereotype of what teenagers are like or what this specific generation of teenagers are like. So to look at some differences, we are going to cast our minds back so that then we can look at what our teenage adolescence years were like versus what the statistics show about this generation of teenagers and kids. So we're going to ask ourselves some questions. You do not have to feed back these questions. Feel free to discuss with them in your groups as much or as little as you would like, because here are the questions. So how old were you when you first saw real life examples of violence and death? So I'm talking not in a film, not fictional, but real life examples of it. How old were you when you got your first phone or tablet, something that connects to the internet? How old were you when you first saw something sexually explicit? You can say that privately. Or what's the first big news story you remember? So I'll give you slightly more time to discuss this, and then we'll look at what the statistics say Gen Z's answer to these questions would be.
I was just going to say that I saw him shot live on television. My mum was cooking me Sunday night dinner, and then I saw the man who was supposed to see shot and I saw him shot and realised a couple of weeks later. So that's why I'm Sunday. Yeah, and I was traumatized.
We did actually see it, I just read about it, or heard about it. Yeah, but then after last weekend, or somebody in the playground said first dead body, I think, or something.
Okay, should we keep those things in the back of our minds? And as we go through, you can kind of compare your answers and what it might mean about your childhood and adolescence to the answers that the statistics tell us Gen Z particularly would be answering to these, mainly because we don't have enough data yet about Gen Alpha because they're so young. So when was the first time you saw something, examples of violence and or death? So we've got the online safety bill coming up, and because of that, a lot of research has been done specifically on Gen Z and technology. And they found that through being online, children as young as 10 in primary school are not only seeing violent images, but being encouraged to share it with their friends out of wanting to be popular. That was especially common in boys aged 10 to 13. But the same study also found that as kids got older, the images of violence that they were being shown on their phones not only got more violent, but became more targeted. So boys would be shown a lot of images of, or content, I should say, of violence against women or gang violence, and girls would be shown more and more images to do with things like self-harm and eating disorders. So violent images from primary school. So we don't know what effect that will have on their brain until they're older, but all of us can kind of guess that's probably not going to be good for them to be seeing. What about how old you were when you got your first phone or tablet? I was 11. It was a brick. I had £2 of credit to use only in emergencies. It had no phone, no music, and I was only allowed to use it to contact my parents. In contrast to 40% of 2-year-olds have their own tablet. Yep, 51% of children aged 8 or under have their own mobile phone. And lots of these kids reported needing these devices for loads of different things. So they would use them to do things like emotionally regulate themselves, to help them go to sleep, even to help them eat. And the same study also found that parents did very little supervision. So you have to be 13 years old to have a TikTok account, which in my opinion is way too young anyway. 17% of parents who knew their child was on TikTok were supervising. So all of the other parents knew that their child was on TikTok before they're old enough to be, and were not supervising them. So they have access to the world in all its wonders, but also in all its dangers at their fingertips from the age of 2. Not great.
Is
Yeah.
this UK figures?
This is UK figures, yeah. This was mostly all of this was to do with the online safety bill.
When,
Yeah.
when you say their own tablet, do you mean as we have tablets, or do you mean, a child version of a tablet?
Sometimes child versions, sometimes not. Kind of hard to regulate it. Most of the time it's iPads. And the thing is with most child locks, kids are more tech savvy than their parents, so we'll find a way around most of them. The average age of watching pornography is now 13. This is an image, not like a page free or whatever. This is like actual pornography that they are not only seeing but watching. Lots of them said they stumble across it online accidentally through social media sites. And again, we have no idea what effect this is having on their development as they grow up, especially in how they view things like relationships, how boys view women, how girls view men, etc. And then, I couldn't pick what a defining news story of this generation could be. There's too much. So we've got the COVID lockdown. So most kids, let's think, nearly all secondary school students would have been in lockdown. I think year 5 is probably the youngest group that would remember it because they would have been in year 1 during lockdown. That would have had a massive effect on them. We also have things like the Black Lives Matter protests, and just protests in general are a lot more visible online, and lots of kids actually go to them as well. Lots of teenagers do. Then we just have the political kind of turmoil of the last few years. They're very used to it. It's all they've known. Most of Gen Z and Gen Alpha have only known Joe Biden and Donald Trump as US presidents. They've only known that extreme polarization that's going on. So all of this has an effect on how they view the world around them in the same way that what we were exposed to and not exposed to would have affected how we viewed the world around us. So we're going to be having a little look at Gen Z and Gen Alpha's worldview, mostly concentrating on Gen Z because they're the ones we have the data for. But it's important to realize here that this applies to both children and young people who are coming from a non-Christian home, as well as kids who are coming from a Christian home, even kids that profess faith already. Because if you add up the amount of hours that are in a week, the amount of hours they're in the care of their parents and at church is smaller than the amount of hours they are on their phone with their friends. So what's making up most of their worldview is going to be the people, the culture around them, and what they see on their phones. So even Christian kids will be influenced by this Gen Z, Gen Alpha worldview. And importantly for us, this worldview is what they see the gospel through. So everything we tell them about Jesus is interpreted through this worldview. So you be you, be true to yourself, find yourself, follow your heart, live your truth. These are all phrases, the language that's used by Gen Z and Gen Alpha, and I'll confess I use it too. When the kids are doing something weird, like the other week they were at youth club all on their phones, and when I asked them what they were doing, they showed me the video they were looking, and it was a dancing lion, and I was like, well, I don't know why you're looking at that, but I was like, okay, you be you, you be you. And I think that phrase defines what the worldview is for this generation, and we call it expressive individualism. And it's the worldview that if you dig deep inside yourselves and find your own identity, find who you are as an individual, and then express it, live it out, that is how you will find fulfillment, that's how you'll find happiness, that is what the purpose of life is to find who you are and express it. And for children and young people, this is the air they breathe, because they're raised on it from a really young age, even if it's unintentionally. So Encanto here is one of my favorite Disney movies. I highly recommend everyone goes and watches it. For the soundtrack alone, it's amazing. But it focuses on this main character, Mirabel. Mirabel is from a magical family called the Madrigals. All of them received a special power when they were children, apart from Mirabel. For some reason, she never gets one. And the film is about her working out where she stands in amongst a magical family, while also showing that the magical family members all had struggles going on deep inside themselves too. And no spoilers, because I do want you to go and watch it. It ends with, surprise, Mirabelle was always enough, even though she didn't have magical powers. Who she was, just being her, was enough for her family. And all of her magical family members, they needed to be seen for who they were on the inside and not just the magical powers that you could see from the outside. So that you can see the slight message there to children is that for their happily ever after, they need to find who they are on the inside, because who they are on the inside is enough. And it's when they find that and accept that and express that, that they will be happy. And they don't just get this from Disney. A lot of blame can be laid at Disney's door, but not all of it. They get it from other TV shows, they get it from school, they get it from books, they even get it from parents, because at the root of it, it's a very nice message. It's good that we should tell children that everyone is different, and it's good and right that we should tell children that everyone is uniquely made, because we know they are uniquely made by God. But what's dangerous is telling them that finding that identity and expressing it is where they'll find meaning and happiness and fulfillment. They will live happily ever after ending. So that's how they get the be yourself worldview in a nutshell. Because the you do you, be yourself, find yourself, live your truth, that's what underpins how Gen Z and Gen Alpha view the world around them. It has a direct effect on how they view themselves, their purpose in life, and the purpose of everyone around them. And we kind of see that reflected in their values, in their moral ethics. So Generation Z, the Global Citizen Survey, interviewed 20,000 young people in 20 countries. So it's the most extensive and global survey of its kind. And here are some of its findings about Gen Z. So, for UK teens, the most important factor in whether a country was a good place to live was whether or not in that country they'd be able to live the way they wanted to freely. Most important, the UBU, so long as you're not harming anyone, everyone should be free to do what they feel is right for them. And what about faith? What did this survey find about faith?
Can I just ask one question?
Yeah.
Do they therefore follow it on that abortion isn't on anyone?
Yeah, they view it as the woman who is carrying the baby is the primary person involved in the...
And it's not a baby that's been harmed?
It's not a baby that's being harmed, no, not to them. So what about faith? This study found that religion was generally included in that level of in that belief of tolerance. So it was only 17% of kids said that they would choose not to be friends with someone or choose to be friends with someone based on their religious views. So for the most part, they're happy for other people to be religious. They're happy for people to be religious so long as it doesn't come into conflict with their beliefs. But only 11% of those questioned thought that faith was important to them. So they themselves are not very religious, don't really value faith for themselves personally, but they're fine for other people to have a faith and live that out and express it until it comes into conflict with the freedom and tolerance that they profess in other areas. In other words, you be you, but not like that, because in lots of those same areas. So we saw that they were generally in an upward trend in tolerance towards LGBT rights, but there's a sharp increase in homophobic bullying. We saw that 89% of them thought that men and women should be equal, but there's been an increase in sexual harassment in schools, etc., is on the rise in schools. I've seen that on camp. But the saddest thing of all was that only 57% of Gen Z in the UK feel happy. And the older Gen Z got, the less happy they felt. And there's a lot of factors in this, from social media, lack of sleep, lack of community, changes in family dynamics, school pressure. But I think expressive individualism has a lot to answer for when it comes to this statistic, because expressive individualism has promised these children the world, and it's failed to deliver. It's promised them fulfillment and happiness, and it has failed to deliver. Because they've been taught to look inward, to find joy, to find purpose, to find meaning, when we know they should be looking upwards to God to find that. Because when they're looking inside themselves and following that path, all they're leading to is the sin that's in their own hearts. That's why we have these slogans to do with Gen Z. So we've got Generation Fear, the loneliest generation, Generation Numb, Generation Ketamine was a new one this week. Because we've seen that Generation Z and Gen Alpha following behind them are just incredibly lost because they're the most connected generation and yet the loneliest. They're the most informed generation and that's just made them numb. And they're the most tolerant generation and yet they're facing an extremism crisis. But before we continue, a slight word of warning, word of caution actually. Not warning, warning's a bit harsh. So when we hear all these things, especially Gen Z views, our response could be to go, okay, so we need to be talking to our young people more about this, this, and this. We need to be telling them what the Bible says about identity, about sex and relationships. And that is true. I'll come on to that a bit later. But I think there is a word of caution here that we should listen to, which is if their hearts aren't captured by Jesus, then we're unlikely to convince them to follow his teachings versus the truth that they feel on the inside. If their hearts aren't captured for Jesus, they're not going to follow his teachings when it comes into conflict with what they feel is their truth. So I won't make you confess to it, but if any of you watch I'm a Celeb? I don't, but this conversation came up a lot on my social media feed last year. So we've got J.K. Barry here, who I'm told is an influencer. And we've got the Reverend Richard Coles, who was on Strictly. That's all I know about him. But J.K. Barry was talking about her childhood, growing up, going to church and things. And she spoke about how she decided to turn away from Christianity when she was 13. And she said that she already knew that she was gay. She was already aware of that fact, already happy with that fact. And was looking forward to one day marrying a woman when she grew up. But she went to a Jesus camp when she was 13, and in her words, Jesus camp was also her phrase, I should say that. And then in her words, all they did was talk to her about sex and how she shouldn't have sex before marriage. And so the teaching of the camp came in direct conflict with her truth, what she knew to be her truth. And because she didn't know Jesus, she didn't care what they said. She knew what she wanted. She didn't know Jesus. Why should she follow his teachings? And so she ended up leaving the church altogether because of that.
But he was also like believing in God, and he was married to a man, wasn't he? Because the man died.
Yeah, that's why they were discussing it. But he wasn't her camp leader, so they would have had different experiences. But yeah, so following your heart versus following Jesus. I think it means that in our services and in our youth groups, in our conversations with young people, we need to make it a priority to capture their hearts for Jesus. We need to fill them up with joy and love of him so that they want to follow him and obey him, follow him in obedience and faith, rather than follow their hearts or what the world around them tells them is in their hearts. So yes, we should talk about these discipleship issues. It's really important that we do, and it's really important that we train parents to have these awkward conversations with teenagers. But the best news that we have for them as a church is the gospel. Because teenagers change, but the gospel remains the same. It's good news, isn't it? Teenagers change, but the good news of Jesus remains true. And teenagers change, but the good news of Jesus remains relevant. So what do the young people and the kids in your church need? They need to hear about Jesus, whether it's for the first time or the 100th time. They need to be constantly being pointed back to him. They need to keep hearing about God's love, especially when the world tells them that they're not lovable. And we need to show them God's love in how we speak to them, in how we treat them, in how we view them, versus the communities that they find in the wider world. And it might not seem like much when we look at that, how much are they in church versus how much are they not in church. But the good news of the gospel is priceless and is no match to that. Because it means when the world tells our young people and our kids that they'll find meaning inside themselves, we get to tell them the truth, which is if they want fulfillment, they need to come to Jesus. If they want to know the meaning of life, they need to come to Jesus. Because I chose Colossians 2 here, but I could also put, I've come that they might have life and have life to the full. That's what the world promises them, is life to the full. But we know the only way to get there is through Jesus. When the world tells them that they should be themselves, but not like that, we can tell them that while they're looking for direction and guidance in how to live and who to be and what to dress like, what to act like, what to think, that actually come to Jesus, follow him, find what he says about these things. So instead of looking inwards all the time, to look upwards to Jesus, to follow him first and foremost. Because if they're wanting transformation, he's the one that can bring them out of sin and into salvation, out of darkness and into light, out of death into life. We get to tell them that good news, which is really exciting. And when they look outside or on their phones and they see all the pain and the confusion that's in the world, we also get to tell them the truth. When the world will give them lies about the reasons behind that pain and suffering, we can tell them that the world is like that because of sin, that the world was never meant to be like that, but it's like that because of sin, that all of creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up into the present time because of sin, because the world and us are waiting for Jesus to return. The good news of Jesus and everything he brings is exactly what this generation need to hear, and really weirdly, they already know it. Bible sales saw 87% within 5 years, largely thanks to newfound spirituality amongst Gen Z. Gen Z loves spiritual things. I'm doing a poll of this on Friday night with my youth group because I have a feeling lots of them believe these things. Manifesting, karma, witch talk, which is witchcraft on TikTok. Probably don't look that up. Paganism, all of these things massively popular with Gen Z. And it's because they are actively seeking meaning and purpose and community in spirituality because they've not found it anywhere else. They've realized that there must be something more, but they just don't know where to look for it. So again, the gospel has all the answers. But the other thing about Gen Z is that they not only need to be told it, they need to see it. So hearing the gospel is one thing. Hearing someone give a testimony about how the gospel has changed their lives, way more important to Gen Z. That's something they will love. That's something they will respond to. And that's something all of us who believe in Jesus can offer them, is a testimony of how Jesus changed our lives and continues to change our lives now. So whatever the pastor, the youth worker, whatever they might say from the front, we get to back it up in sharing the gospel, in conversation, in sharing our testimonies, and in living it out. So I think I've still got EMW camps, but yeah, sorry, I didn't update this. No, I did on my laptop. Fun. What does this mean for your church? I've updated it in my notes. So what does this mean for your church? What does this mean for the young people you work with, the young people in your families? How could knowing this about their worldview change how you interact with them? All that kind of stuff. We're going to discuss it for a little bit. And then I've got some practical tips, which are on the PowerPoint. So that's fun. So yeah, if you have like 5-ish minutes to talk about it, I realise I've just given you a whole bunch of information, but chat amongst yourselves about it, I guess.
If anyone's on church Wi-Fi, can you come off there, please? Wow. Thank you. Yeah, so YouTube straight away.
Yeah, so play mode. This is Mac reading.
I'm only on Microsoft Word.
You and technology don't get on, do they, Owen, you know?
Right, sorry about that.
They weren't childproof, they were nanny-proof, but not childproof. Taught that much, they just instantly
Stay over our house and they're like, sit down.
It's all in the abstract.
But they come downstairs and they go, Dad, can I watch this? Every single time. And I'll have a look through it and go, yeah, that's fine, you can watch that. But they ask my permission every single time. They don't need to. They've got the device, they could just, but they won't.
Okay, so if you guys want to keep having those conversations, please do. I think it's really important for churches to be having this conversation about Gen Z and Gen Alpha. Here are some practical things that I thought of that either we're doing in Litchard or that I want us to be doing more of. First thing is to pray for young people and their parents and follow up these prayers. Pray for them generally, but also pray for them in specific. Pick a family in your church, pray for them, ask them what you can be praying for, follow up that. If one of the kids has an exam, ask them the next week, how did that exam go? Show them that you care about them and you are interested in them and that you are praying for them. Don't hide it from them, don't do it in the dark. Don't stereotype teenagers, or try not to. It's really easy to do. I did a little poll at camp a couple of years ago, and I asked them some of the things they wanted the people in their church to know. And this was one of the most common responses, was basically they didn't like being treated like a stereotype. One of the girls told me that she keeps being told that she's always on her phone. She didn't own a phone. And I think that was a clear case of adults putting an image on her that wasn't actually accurate, and that she was actually quite offended by. So just be careful not to stereotype them, find out who they are and treat them as they are. Invest in parents. Parents are and always will be the first and primary disciplers of their kids. So invest in them, and invest in them from the beginning. See what they need. From mentoring, maybe pairing them up with an older couple who've had kids leave home already. See if they need childcare so that they can go to more services, so they can go to specific seminars. If you read a book that's useful, give it to them, maybe get them to start a little book club. Right from day one, try and start this. A lot of the things I see church doing is that when a baby is born, we all pray for that baby and we pray that they'll grow up knowing God. We even say as a church, like I do, or whatever it is you do in your church, to say that you will help the parents. And then we just don't check in with them until they're 13, and then we start getting worried about them. Keep it up. Like the toddler years, I get it. Like toddlers are sticky and we don't know why they're sticky, and that can be a bit gross. But like still invest in them, still love them, hang out with them, find out about them. And that follows into invest in young people. Chat to them. They're not as scary as they make out. Some of them are, but like most of them aren't. And the more you chat to them, the less scary they will be. Lots of them are going to be more freaked out by you talking to them than the other way around. It's like a spider. They're more scared of you. But if you start that when they're kids, that can be really useful. So in our church, I've watched some people do this. So we had one man who every single Sunday learnt an animal fact so that he could go and share it with a 7-year-old who was obsessed with animals. And that 7-year-old didn't like talking to him at the beginning. That 7-year-old is now 10 and really likes talking to him. They don't do the animal fact anymore, but they still chat every single week. Lots of boys like football. Learn what team they like, chat to them about their team, even if you yourself, like me, have no interest in football. Or we've got 3 guys in our church who every week get the kids to pick a number, and they then go and read the number that psalm corresponds to. And then they come to the kids the next week and say, I read that psalm, here are my 3 words to describe that psalm. So the kids are being involved in the kind of discipleship of these older men in the church. But it's getting them to have a conversation about the Bible, even though there's a massive difference between these guys and the 4-year-old who's giving them the number. They are still creating those connections and that community together, I guess. And then as the kids grow up, those little conversations can become friendships, and those intergenerational friendships can become mentoring and discipleship, and they can be incredibly valuable for young people. Also follows in, encourage those intergenerational friendships, because most kids, when they stop feeling like they're part of the church community, that's when they don't want to show up anymore. That's when things like football becomes more important to them, because football gives them what they want. If they've got friends and they have a community here that's intergenerational, that loves them, and it's not just the other kids and the youth worker, they'll feel happy here and want to be here. Not all of them, but lots of them. Give young people the chance to serve, and crucially, give them accountability in this. So don't just give all teenagers the chance to serve in a youth group when they reach this age. Offer that to the ones who you see growing in faith, showing fruits in their faith. But also give them accountability in it. If they are only showing up on a Sunday when they're on a rota, talk to them about that. Say to them, that's not great. I'm worried about your walk with God because you're not making a church a priority. Have that hard conversation with them, just like you would an adult. They need to have that spiritual accountability just like adults would from people who aren't their parents. We don't need to do it in a harsh way, but we can just do it in a I'm concerned, are you okay kind of way. And parents, I think, have those difficult conversations. Again, it's going to be just as awkward for them as it is for you. But the more you have those conversations, the less awkward it will be, the more comfortable they will be coming to you with things that they find troubling. I have coffee every week with a mum, not a Christian, but she told her son right from the beginning that she will always be looking at his phone because there are things online that will hurt him and harm him, and she wants to keep him from those. And so they've regularly gone through his phone together and discussed some of those things that he's found. And it means that now, even though he's in year 11, he will come to her when he sees something that he doesn't like or isn't comfortable with and ask her what he should do. It's why he's still happy to have her on his phone and have her regularly check his phone, because he understands the purpose for it isn't to get him into trouble or to shout at him, but it's out of a concern for him. Start the conversations early, so it's not as weird later on. Maybe don't do what my parents did, which was just like randomly just start banning things without explaining it. Like, one day I was allowed Harry Potter, the next day I was not allowed Harry Potter. I didn't know why, it was very confusing. Have the chat, it'll be worth it. But the best bit of advice is to pray for Gen Z and Gen Alpha and pray for those who work with them regularly. Because we don't know what our young people have gone through or are going through. We don't know what's going on inside their brains. They don't know what's going on inside their brains or how much all of this stuff they're getting from the world is influencing them. But we know that for each and every one of them, the best thing that they can have is Jesus in their lives. The best news that they can hear is Jesus. And that should give us confidence as we chat to them that we might not feel cool, we might feel awkward, but we're going to them with the news of the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes. Like, that's not a tiny little message. That's a massive bit of good news, life-changing good news that we are offering them, which can change their entire lives. Because we know the gospel is alive and active and true. And so as scared as we might feel for the next generation, as overwhelming as all of this might be when we think about them, we know that at the end of the day, it's the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes. Nothing that's going on in their outside world can defeat that. So I'm going to guess that some of you are feeling a bit overwhelmed, feeling a bit pressure, and I think that's good. I don't think we should treat youth and families work or interacting with children or helping families kind of in a blasé fashion. I think we should feel overwhelmed by the responsibility of it because it is a huge responsibility, but let that responsibility keep bringing us back to God rather than on ourselves for reliance, because again, it is the power of God that brings salvation for everyone who believes. But if you want to know more, here are some things that me and some other youth workers put together to recommend. This is a mix of things of that could help you understand Gen Z or Gen Alpha, or also just things that you could read that could then help you in conversations with them. So, for example, talking to kids about relationships. One of the big things right now with boys is the whole they don't want to be single thing. 7 myths of singleness. Talk to them about it from an honest point of view. Yeah, that's kind of all I've got for you. But my prayer is that it will be useful and helpful for you as you welcome in children and young people into your church.
Can you share that slide with us? So
Yep. I've also put my email at the bottom in case anyone wants any of the other papers that I've referenced or anything like that. Or to message me and say it was rubbish, but preferably not that one.
Well, thank you, Caroline, for giving that. You don't want to take 1 or 2 questions, then?
Oh yeah, questions, that's what I should have put.
That means Owen's got some.
I'm just opening it up.
Yep.
You started off by talking about worldview. Isn't this generation worldview more dominated by social media and the screen? And should we be connecting with them through that media, which is where they seem to be, much of their life seems to be involved?
Yeah, I think we should. I think it would be good for churches or just good Bible teaching to be more readily available to them. But if we're talking to Christian kids or kids in a Christian context, I think what we should also be doing is teaching them how to be discerning. because there's a lot of Christian content online, and not all of it, I would say most of it, is not good, is not true. So, for example, this is going to sound really weird and make you judge me, but it's fine. So one of the things I do is I research a lot into how the rise of misogyny and violence against women, specifically in Christian context, and how Christian teaching could be backing that up. So in that, I found a popular website which was called The Godly Gentleman. Don't look it up. I mean, do, but don't. But I was like, imagine if you're a parent and you're scrolling through your kids' like internet history or whatever, and you see Godly Gentleman, you're like, oh, nice. They're looking at how to be a godly gentleman. The basic teaching of this website is that God made man first, because man was how it was intended to be. And then women had to be made later, basically for the sake of reproduction, because animals wouldn't do. So it was like man's best friend, and then like women there. But that's disguised as good orthodox teaching to these kids. And if we haven't taught them discernment, then how are they going to be able to tell what is good teaching that they should be listening to and what is bad? So yes, we should put more things online, and I think it's great when people do, and it's good. But we also need to be complementing that with teaching them some level of discernment, or again, like making them feel comfortable enough to discuss things with us, so they're not hiding it away in secret. Yeah.
All right,
Cool.
that seems to be it. Is that it?
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Caroline. If we could help
Thank
put
you.
the chairs and tables away, that would be